The third time I came home and found Beverly Hargrove's white Cadillac Escalade sitting in my driveway like it owned the place. I did not honk. I did not knock on her door. I did not leave a politely worded note under her windshield wiper. I stood in the street for about 45 seconds looking at that truck, and then I went inside and I started making phone calls. Not to Beverly, not to the HOA. To a brick supplier and a landscaping contractor I had been talking to for 3 weeks already, because by the third time something happens you are no longer surprised, you are prepared. My name is Daniel Osei, and I have lived at 9 Holloway Drive in Ferndale Commons for 2.5 years. I bought the house because it had good bones, a big kitchen, and a driveway wide enough for 2 cars side by side, which mattered to me because I own a small renovation business and I regularly need to park my work truck and my personal car at the same time without one of them blocking the other. The driveway was not an aesthetic feature. It was a functional one. It was the reason I chose this house over 2 others I had been considering. Beverly Hargrove lived 4 houses down. She was 61, retired from some administrative role in local government, and had been a fixture in Ferndale Commons long enough that she treated the neighborhood the way very old trees treat a garden, as something that existed around them and for them and should be grateful for their presence. She was not the HOA president. She was something more difficult to deal with than that. She was the HOA president's best friend, which meant she had all the informal influence of the office with none of the formal accountability. The HOA president was a man named Gerald Finch, who was 64, owned the largest house on the street, and whose approach to governance was essentially to let Beverly tell him what to think and then say it out loud at meetings. Gerald was not a bad man. He was a conflict-averse man who had learned over many years that the path of least resistance in Ferndale Commons ran directly through Beverly Hargrove's approval, and he had optimized his life around staying on that path. He smiled a lot, said very little of substance, and deferred to Beverly on anything that mattered. Beverly had parked in my driveway the first time about 4 months after I moved in. I had not even met her properly yet. I came home from a job site, tired, with lumber in the bed of my truck that I needed to unload into the garage, and found her Escalade in my driveway. I knocked on her door. She answered with the mildly impatient expression of someone interrupted from something more important. "That's my driveway," I said. "I know," she said. "I was just running in quickly. There wasn't any street parking." There was street parking. There is always street parking on Holloway Drive. It is a residential street in a neighborhood with driveways. But I was new and I wanted to be neighborly, so I said, "Please don't do it again," and she said, "Of course, sorry about that," and I went home and unloaded my lumber. She did it again 6 weeks later. This time I left a note. She knocked on my door the same evening to tell me the note had been a bit much and that she had only been there for 15 minutes, and that in her experience, neighbors in this community looked out for each other, which apparently meant tolerating her parking in my driveway whenever she decided street parking was inconvenient. I told her again, clearly, do not park in my driveway. The third time was the Saturday I described at the beginning. I had been at a job site all day, I was tired, I had my truck loaded with tools that I needed to put away, and Beverly's Escalade was sitting across the full width of my driveway at 11 in the morning, meaning I could not pull in at all. I parked in the street. I went inside. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and I did what I should have done 6 weeks earlier. I researched my options properly. What I learned was not complicated. My driveway is my property. It is within my lot boundary. It is listed in my deed. I pay property taxes on it, and I have the absolute legal right to control who parks on it. In Ohio, where I live, parking on private property without the owner's permission is trespassing. I could have called a tow truck each time and had her car removed at her expense. I had not done that because I was trying to be a reasonable neighbor and not escalate unnecessarily. I had also learned something else in those 3 months that made me think the tow truck was not the complete solution. Beverly had not been doing this randomly. She had a parking pattern. Her Escalade was in my driveway specifically when she had guests, when her daughter visited with her husband and 3 kids, and they needed extra vehicle space, when she was hosting her book club on the second Tuesday of the month, when various friends came over for weekend gatherings. My driveway had become her informal overflow parking without my consent, and without any acknowledgement that this was unusual or inappropriate. And here was the other thing. Ferndale Commons had an HOA with rules about parking. Those rules included a provision, buried in Section 6, that said residents should not block other residents' driveways or parking areas. I had looked it up. It was right there. But the HOA had never once sent Beverly Hargrove a violation notice about this. Not once. Because Beverly was Beverly and Gerald was Gerald, and the rules in Ferndale Commons were applied to the people Beverly did not like, not to Beverly. I knocked on Beverly's door that Saturday, and she took 90 seconds to answer. When she opened the door, she had that expression again, the mildly put-upon look, as if I were a minor inconvenience she had to process before getting back to her actual life. "Beverly," I said, "that's the third time. I need you to move your car, and I need you to stop doing this." "Daniel," she said, with the patience of someone explaining something simple to someone slow, "it's just temporary. I have company. There's really no need to be difficult about it." "It's my driveway," I said. "That's not being difficult. That's a basic property boundary." She looked at me the way people look at someone they have decided is not worth engaging with. "I'll move it in an hour," she said. "You'll move it now," I said. "I have tools in my truck I need to put in my garage." She moved it. She did it with the energy of someone doing you an enormous favor, backing the Escalade out slowly, making the whole operation take 5 minutes that it could have taken 30 seconds. She did not apologize. She did not look at me when she drove past. She went back to her company. I unloaded my truck. I went inside. I sat back down at my kitchen table and I called my contractor. His name was Tommy Renard, and he ran a hardscaping business that I had worked alongside on a couple of renovation projects. Tommy did driveways, walkways, retaining walls, and all manner of brick and stone work, and he was excellent at it. I had already had a preliminary conversation with him 2 weeks earlier, after the second incident, about something I had been considering. Now I told him to schedule it. Here is what I had in mind. The entrance to my driveway was about 18 feet wide. It was a standard poured concrete driveway that the previous owners had put in, unremarkable, functional, with a simple curb cut where it met the street. What I wanted to do was install a pair of brick pillar posts, one at each front corner of the driveway entrance, proper masonry pillars, maybe 4 feet tall, decorative and structural, and between those pillars, set into the ground flush with the driveway surface, a set of steel surface mount anchor points that would allow me to attach a removable steel pipe barrier across the entrance. The barrier would be padlocked. I would have the key. The result would be a driveway entrance that was visually defined, aesthetically attractive, and physically secured when I was not using it. Tommy had told me the total cost would be around $2,200. The pillars, the anchor hardware, the steel pipe, the locks, landscaping around the bases. Not cheap, but not extraordinary for a hardscaping project, and I owned the property and had the right to improve it however I wanted within code. I checked the city requirements. Decorative pillar posts and removable barriers at driveway entrances were permitted as long as they did not exceed certain height limits and did not interfere with the sidewalk or the public right-of-way, which mine would not. I did not need a building permit for this specific project, just compliance with the setback rules, which I verified carefully. I did not submit an HOA application. I want to explain why. I had been in Ferndale Commons long enough to know how the architectural approval process worked under Gerald and Beverly's informal partnership. Anything I submitted would be reviewed by Beverly. She would find a reason to delay it, request additional information, raise objections about aesthetics or community character, and string the process out for months while she continued to park in my driveway whenever she felt like it. The standard result of HOA architectural review for projects Beverly did not like was an endless procedural slowdown that accomplished nothing except wearing you down until you gave up. But I had also done my homework on this specific issue. I had looked at every line of the Ferndale Commons architectural guidelines that could possibly apply to a driveway entrance modification. The guidelines addressed fence height, outbuilding placement, exterior paint colors, and deck construction. They said nothing nothing specific, nothing clear about pillar posts or driveway barriers. The closest applicable provision was a general clause about exterior modifications being subject to review, which was the kind of language that is useful for catching things the rules writers forgot, but is not specific enough to prohibit anything clearly. I spoke with Maureen, my real estate attorney, who told me that the combination of no specific prohibition and no clear applicable rule meant that if the HOA tried to force me to remove the pillars, they would be relying on a very thin interpretation of a very vague provision, and that she would be comfortable defending my position. She also told me, as she often did, to document everything. Tommy scheduled the work for the following Saturday. He and his crew arrived at 7 in the morning. By noon, the pillar footings were poured. The actual pillar construction happened the following weekend. Tommy liked to let footings cure fully before building on them, which I respected as proper professional practice. The pillars went up in a day, 2 solid brick columns, 4 feet tall, capped with flat stone caps, one on each side of the driveway entrance. They looked genuinely nice. Better than the bare concrete edge that had been there before. Tommy had matched the brick color to the front walkway pavers, so it looked intentional and coordinated. The anchor hardware went in at the same time, steel plates set flush into the driveway surface near each pillar base, with secure mounting points for the removable steel pipe. The pipe itself was a 2-inch diameter galvanized steel tube, powder-coated black to match the pillar caps, with a bracket and padlock on the street left end. When the pipe was in place and locked, it sat at about knee height across the full entrance of the driveway. It was visible, it was clear, and it was physically impassable to a standard passenger vehicle. When I was not home, the pipe went up and got locked. When I was home or needed access, I unlocked it, swung it aside, and drove through. The whole project was finished on a Sunday. I stood at the end of my driveway and looked at it. The pillars were solid and handsome. The barrier looked purposeful without looking aggressive. It looked like a man who owned his property and intended to keep owning it. My neighbor across the street, a retired firefighter named Ed Bukowski, who had lived in Ferndale Commons for 15 years and who had his own complicated history with Beverly, came over as I was finishing up and stood next to me looking at the pillars. "She's not going to like that," Ed said. "No," I said. "Going to be a thing." "Probably." He nodded slowly, with the satisfied expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to see something happen. "Good," he said, and went back to his yard. He was right that it was going to be a thing. It became a thing faster than I expected, and from a direction I had not anticipated. Beverly did not drive past and quietly accept the new reality. She drove past on Monday morning, slowed down, looked at the pillars, looked at the barrier, and then parked in the street and sat in her Escalade for a moment before going home. By Tuesday afternoon, I had received a formal violation notice from the HOA. It was signed by Gerald Finch and cited a provision about exterior modifications requiring prior architectural committee approval, and it gave me 30 days to either obtain retroactive approval from the committee or remove the modifications. The notice was typed on HOA letterhead and had the slightly stiff formality of something that had been written by someone who was repeating words that had been given to them rather than generating the words themselves. I photographed the notice, scanned it, and sent it to Maureen. She called me back within the hour. "Okay," she said, "here's what we're going to do." What we were going to do was submit a retroactive architectural application. This was, Maureen explained, actually the smart play. Submitting an application created a formal record, started a formal timeline, and put the committee in the position of having to articulate specific objections. If they approved it, the issue was resolved. If they rejected it, we had documented grounds for appeal, and the thin nature of their legal basis would be on record. If they failed to respond within the 30-day review period, we had a default approval argument. I submitted the application, full documentation, photos of the finished pillars from multiple angles, site plan, material specifications, a description of the project purpose, driveway security and aesthetic improvement, comparable examples from other neighborhoods. The city compliance verification I had already done. I submitted its certified mail and also by email with red receipt to the committee address. Then I waited. What I did not do was remove the pillars or the barrier while the application was under review. I was still living in my house and still needing to secure my driveway. The violation notice gave me 30 days to either get approval or remove the modification. Since I had submitted for approval, I was in the process of seeking approval, and the structure remained. Beverly parked in the street. She had to. The barrier was up and locked every time she drove past. The first 2 weeks were quiet in the way that things are quiet when someone is deciding what to do next. I saw Beverly a couple of times getting her mail. She did not wave. I waved anyway because I am a grown adult and waving at your neighbors costs nothing. At the 2-week mark, Gerald Finch knocked on my door. He came alone, without his clipboard, which was unusual. He was a tall man with white hair and reading glasses he wore pushed up on his forehead, and he had the look that afternoon of someone who had been sent to do something he was not entirely comfortable doing. "Daniel," he said, "I wanted to talk about the application." "Of course," I said, "come in." He declined, same as Sandra from the last story, and we talked in the doorway. He explained that the committee had concerns about the barrier specifically, that a physical barrier across a driveway entrance was not something that had been done in Ferndale Commons before, and that there were questions about emergency access, about aesthetics, about whether it set a precedent. I addressed each one. Emergency access. The barrier was removable with a standard padlock and could be removed in under 15 seconds by any emergency responder, and in any case, emergency vehicles have the legal authority to breach private property obstacles in genuine emergencies. Aesthetics. I had photos showing the pillars matched the existing walkway pavers and represented an improvement over the bare concrete edge. Precedent. I noted that the rules did not prohibit what I had done, and that applying rules that did not exist would itself be a concerning precedent. Gerald nodded thoughtfully at each point with the expression of someone taking notes mentally to report back. "I'll bring this to the committee," he said. "I appreciate it," I said. "I want to note for the record that the parking situation that prompted this project is also a violation of Section 6 of our community rules, and I would welcome the committee addressing that issue as well." Gerald looked at me. He knew exactly what I was referring to. "I'll bring it up," he said, with the tone of someone who was not going to bring it up. He left. I went back inside. That evening, I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board. I described each of the 3 incidents in which Beverly had parked in my driveway without my permission, gave the dates, described my attempts to address it directly, and formally requested that the board enforce Section 6. I sent it certified mail. 22 days after submitting my architectural application, I had received no formal response from the committee. The 30-day window in the violation notice was 8 days away. And then Beverly Hargrove made the decision that turned this from an annoying neighborhood dispute into the story I am telling you right now. It was a Thursday evening in November, dark by 5:30, cold enough that I was wearing a jacket to check the mail. I had come home from a job site around 4, put the barrier up, and locked it as I always did after pulling in, and gone inside. I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone lit up with a notification from my driveway camera. I looked at the screen. Beverly's Escalade was sitting at the entrance of my driveway, idling. The headlights were on. I could see the exhaust in the cold air. I watched the camera feed. She stayed there for about 2 minutes, engine running. Then she pulled forward until the front bumper was touching the steel pipe barrier. Not hard, just resting against it, the way you might tap a door to test if it's locked. The barrier did not move. It was anchored at both ends. She reversed a few feet, pulled forward again, this time with a little more deliberateness. The pipe flexed very slightly. Tommy had engineered some give into the mounting brackets precisely to prevent the anchors from being stressed by lateral force, but held. She reversed again. I put down my spatula, wiped my hands, and walked to my front door. I opened it and stood on the front step. She could see me. I could see her through the windshield, her face lit by the dashboard lights. We looked at each other for a moment. Then she did something I genuinely had not predicted. She put the Escalade in park, got out, and walked to the barrier. She was wearing a coat, and her reading glasses were pushed up on her head the way she wore them when she was concentrating on something. She crouched down and looked at the padlock. Then she looked at the anchor bracket on the near side. Then she stood up and looked at me. "Open this," she said. "No," I said. "Daniel, I need to park here tonight. My daughter is coming with her family, and I don't have room." "Your driveway fits 3 cars," I said. "I've counted. The kids need space to play tomorrow morning, and I don't want cars in the way." I looked at her for a moment. "Beverly," I said, "you parked in my driveway without permission 3 times. I told you not to twice. You did it anyway, so I installed a barrier, which is my right on my own property. The barrier stays." "This is childish," she said. "The application for the pillars and barrier is pending with the committee," I said. "If you have concerns, put them in writing to the committee." She looked at the barrier again. Then she did something I still find difficult to fully explain, because it required a particular combination of confidence, entitlement, and poor judgment that I would not have credited even Beverly with if I had not watched it happen on camera. She went back to her Escalade, got in, and drove forward. Not a tap, not a test. She drove the front end of her Escalade into the steel pipe barrier with enough force to attempt to push it aside. What happened next happened in about 3 seconds. The anchor brackets, which were set into 4-inch deep steel sleeves in the concrete, held. The pipe, rather than giving way, transferred the force into the Escalade's front bumper and lower grille area. There was a sound, not a crash exactly, more a sustained metallic complaint, and then Beverly reversed sharply. I was already walking toward the driveway. I had my phone out. I was filming. The front of the Escalade had a visible crease in the lower bumper cover and the lower grille surround. It was not catastrophic damage. She had not been going fast enough for that, but it was real, visible damage that was going to cost real money. Beverly got out and looked at the front of her car. Then she looked at my barrier. The pipe had a slight bend in it near the right bracket. Tommy's Flex Engineering had done its job of protecting the anchors, but the pipe had taken the hit and deformed maybe 10 degrees. The brackets and anchors were undamaged. Beverly looked at me. I was standing at the end of my driveway, filming on my phone. "You did this," she said. I did not respond to that. "Beverly," I said, "you just drove your vehicle into my private property barrier. That's property damage. I'm filming and I have camera footage of the entire incident. I'd recommend you call your insurance company." She stared at me. The confidence that had carried her through this moment was visibly recalibrating in real time, the way a program reboots when it encounters something it was not written to handle. "You'll be hearing from me," she said. "I imagine so," I said. "Good night, Beverly." She got back in the Escalade and drove home. I went inside and called Maureen. Maureen was eating dinner when I called. I heard her set down her fork. I gave her the account in full. She asked me to send her the camera footage immediately, which I did from the app while we were still on the phone. She watched it and said, "Okay, this is actually quite clean." Then she said, "Here is what is going to happen next, and here is what you are going to do." What she told me was to do nothing provocative, say nothing further to Beverly directly, document the barrier damage with photographs the next morning in daylight, get a repair quote from Tommy, and wait. Beverly had damaged my property by driving into it deliberately. That was straightforward. What Beverly would try to do now was reframe it, claim the barrier was illegal, claim it had not been properly approved, claim some fault in how it was installed or positioned that made it my responsibility. None of those arguments would hold up, but Maureen wanted us to let Beverly make her move before we responded. Beverly's move came in the form of a letter from an attorney. It arrived 4 days later. The letter argued that the barrier constituted an illegal obstruction under HOA community standards, that it had been installed without proper approval, and that because of its illegal status, Beverly bore no liability for the damage to her vehicle that resulted from its presence on the property. It requested that I remove the barrier immediately, waive any claim for repair costs, and this was the creative part, pay for the damage to Beverly's Escalade on the grounds that my illegal barrier had caused it. I had to read that last part twice. She wanted me to pay for the damage to her car that she had caused by ramming my property. Maureen's response letter was 12 pages long, and it was a thing of beauty. I will summarize the key points. First, the barrier was not illegal. The HOA architectural guidelines did not specifically prohibit driveway entrance barriers. The violation notice claiming the modification required approval was itself based on a general provision that did not clearly apply to this specific type of installation. An architectural application had been submitted within the required time frame and was pending review with 8 days remaining in the committee's response window. The structure was therefore in a compliant pending review status, not an illegal status. Second, regardless of the HOA status question, Beverly had driven her vehicle into private property. The camera footage and my phone video documented this clearly and showed it was a deliberate act, not an accident. The Ferndale Commons community rules in Section 6 specifically prohibited unauthorized access to and interference with other residents' private property areas. Beverly had violated Section 6, not me. Third, the damage to the Escalade was the direct result of Beverly's choice to drive into the barrier. The barrier was visible, stationary, and positioned entirely within my property. No reasonable person drives their vehicle into a visible private property barrier by accident. The claim that I bore liability for damage resulting from Beverly's deliberate act was without legal merit, and if pursued, would result in a counterclaim for the cost of repairing my barrier and any associated legal fees. Fourth, we were formally requesting that the HOA board enforce Section 6 against Beverly for the 3 prior unauthorized parking incidents and for the deliberate driving into private property incident, all of which were documented and on record. Beverly's attorney did not respond to Maureen's letter. I did not hear from Beverly directly. What I did hear, about a week later, from Ed Bukowski, was that Beverly had filed an insurance claim for the Escalade damage and that her insurance company had asked for documentation of what she had driven into. When she explained to them that she had driven into a private property barrier while attempting to access someone else's driveway, they had some questions. I do not know the outcome of that claim. I do not need to. 26 days after I had submitted my architectural application, 4 days before the 30-day window closed, the HOA committee sent a letter approving the driveway pillar project. The letter included conditions. The pillars had to remain at their current height of 4 feet, the barrier had to remain removable rather than fixed, and I had to ensure the barrier was opened during any scheduled community maintenance or emergency access events. I had planned all of those things already. I signed the conditions acknowledgement and sent it back. The violation notice was formally withdrawn 2 days later in a separate letter signed by Gerald, which I also filed carefully in my documentation folder. I had Tommy come out and replace the slightly bent pipe at a cost of $80 in materials plus an hour of his time. I billed Beverly for it through Maureen. She paid, through her attorney, without further comment. At the next HOA meeting I attended, the January meeting, cold and lightly attended, I raised the Section 6 enforcement request that I had submitted in November. Gerald acknowledged it. He said the board had reviewed the incidents and was issuing Beverly Hargrove a formal violation notice for the 3 unauthorized parking incidents. He did not say this while looking at her, because Beverly was sitting in her usual seat in the 3rd row. She was looking at a spot on the wall slightly above and to the left of Gerald's head. The violation notice Beverly received was, I was told by Ed, who had sources inside the HOA office, for a total of $300 in accumulated fines for the 3 incidents. She paid it. Beverly had been a fixture of the enforcement side of Ferndale Commons HOA for years. She had sent violation notices to people for leaving their bins out an extra day, for having the wrong color mulch, for parking their own cars in their own driveways in ways she found visually displeasing. Receiving a violation notice herself for real violations with documented evidence was a new experience for her. The barrier has been in place for 14 months now. Not one person has parked in my driveway without my permission since the day Tommy installed the pillars. When I leave in the morning, I lock it behind me. When I come home, I unlock it, pull in, get out, lock it again. It takes maybe 25 seconds round trip. It is the most satisfying 25 seconds of my day. Priya, my Priya, not anyone else's Priya, came to visit last spring, and she stood at the end of the driveway and looked at the pillars and the barrier and said, "You really built this because a lady kept parking here." "She did it 3 times," I said. Priya tilted her head, looking at the solid brick columns with their stone caps and the black powder-coated pipe gleaming in the April light. "It looks good though," she said. "Tommy does good work," I said. Ed Bukowski told me at a block party last summer that since Beverly got that violation notice, the overall energy on Holloway Drive had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly to someone who did not know the history, but the people who had been walking a little carefully around Beverly for years were standing a little straighter. One family 2 houses down from me had submitted 3 architectural applications in the last year for projects they had been putting off because they were not sure Beverly would approve them. All 3 were approved without incident under the more careful process that Gerald, perhaps chastened by the whole affair, was now following more rigorously. Beverly still lives 4 doors down. She gets her mail around 9 in the morning, same as always. I have not had a meaningful conversation with her since the evening of the barrier incident. When we pass on the street, we do what I think of as the nod, that minimal acknowledgement that exists between people who have a history they have both decided to leave exactly where it is. Her Escalade, when I see it parked in her own driveway, has a small repair on the lower front bumper that you can see if you know where to look. The color is slightly off, the way repaired body panels sometimes are. I notice it sometimes. I do not say anything about it. My driveway is mine. The barrier is locked. Tommy's pillars stand at the entrance of 9 Holloway Drive like they have always been there, like they are the most natural thing in the world, which they are, because a man's property is his property and he has every right to mark its edges and hold them. I come home from job sites tired sometimes, the way I was that Saturday when I stood in the street looking at Beverly's Escalade in my driveway for the 3rd time. I pull up to the gate, get out, unlock the padlock, swing the pipe aside, drive in. Get out again, swing it back, click the lock closed. Every single time, it feels like a small and complete victory. Some things are worth every penny. Thumbnail text. She rammed MY gate and paid for it herself. I locked MY driveway, SHE drove right into it. Blocked her once and for all, she never came back.